Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. Luna's Resurgence. Episode 13. Chapter 77 to 81. Nick POV. Nick did not like it one bit. She did not want Samantha as her Omega. The woman was practically his mother, taken him and Mary in without question, found room in her tiny house and loved them like she loved her own sons. She had also just spent the last 3 days taking care of Lucinda, making sure she didn't do anything to aggravate those wounds of hers, which she couldn't even feel were causing her pain. Couldn't feel it. Needed someone to assist her, look after her. How could she want to get rid of Samantha over a cup of tea that was bitter to taste? He couldn't understand it. Wasn't going to stand for it at all, was more than annoyed by her attitude about the situation, angry in fact. Samantha was the most kindest and caring person he knew. Then to call Jeremy to her side, used her Luna aura on him. He'd never seen Jeremy move so fast, with the rare exception when Nick used his aura, usually only in battle. Nick had felt her aura. It had been so darn strong, that it had sent a shiver down his own spine. Brady's head had whipped up and around, nearly jumped to attention himself. It had only been aimed at Jeremy, but everyone in the room had felt it. A wave of pure power had rolled through the room. There was no missing it. Telling her she was the Luna and it was her job to rank the Omegas may not have been the best idea, seeing as she had been mad at him earlier. If she harmed Samantha, they were going to have a very real and serious issue between them that may not be resolvable. He could feel Rip was uncomfortable with the situation. He'd never known anyone but Samantha as a mother either. When she had come in and told her she'd been watching the Omegas train and had picked up that 4 of them should be ranked up, he had been happy. She, as the Luna, had actually just done part of her job. Whether she knew she had was another matter. Probably should find out what she understood about her role. It might be limited. He supposed the previous Luna would have taught her what to do, and they did have a bunch of them, but none of them would know what to do. Not with how they were treated. Jeremy had come in and excused himself. The Luna would like me to take a walk and talk with her, he'd told Nick. Nick had raised an eyebrow but not asked any questions. Jeremy would stop her from doing anything Nick wouldn't approve of. Or mind link him and let him know, so he could go and put a stop to it himself. He stood now, debating about how to approach Lucinda, with regard to Samantha being her Omega. Nick didn't want anyone else in his suite. This could be a massive issue between them. Another fight, he sighed. 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards, it seemed. Would they ever find any common ground? She was very difficult. He sat down at his desk. Rip snarled at his thought, didn't like him calling them difficult moon goddess's child. I'm not going to do anything stupid, he sighed at Rip, just need to vent it out, before coming face to face with her. Or I might say something we will regret. I'll stop you. Rip growled, all aggression showing him. Calm down, he told Rip. I still want our mate. Nick felt Rip's talk off to the back of his mind. He'd ticked off his mate and his wolf all in one day. He found Brady's eyes upon him. She's got a strong aura, Nick. I felt it, he nodded. Surprised, you haven't been on the end of it before now, actually, he smiled at Nick. Made Nick also wonder about that too. There were certainly plenty of times she could have used it on him. Maybe she only just learned how to use it, he mused out loud. But he'd heard Kyra issue that challenge to Darwin, and when he thought about it now, all her aura had poured out of her then too. No. She knew how. Somehow knew how to use it, could just be instinct or because of what Kyra was. He was thankful he hadn't been the target of her aura, Kyra, and Lucinda being a descendant of the moon goddess herself. It might not go in his favor, and now that she was willing to use it at will, their fights might just get worse. Just what he needed. Jeremy didn't return till nearly lunchtime. He was gone a couple of hours. He strolled into Nick's office carrying a sandwich in one hand, a mouthful of it, munching away as though nothing had happened earlier. Nick stared at him pointedly. He simply strolled over and sat down. "Everything is fine, Nick," he told him. "What did she want?" he asked. "Nothing in particular," he shook his head. "Just bored, I'm guessing." Just bored. He was watching Jeremy closely. He had the occasional tell, but nothing today it seemed. He simply went back to eating his sandwich. "Where did you go?" Nick asked him, trying to get anything out of the man. "Go and ask her, Nick. It's no secret." "Then you can tell me." Nick finally snapped at him, annoyed about his lack of information. "I'm not a cell phone. Go and talk to her yourself. It might just be good for you. I hate your games." Nick was angry now that Jeremy wouldn't say anything at all. "Not my game, Nick." His eyes met Nick's with full amusement in them. Nick's anger didn't bother him at all. Nick glared at him. "Not his game." Great, that could mean anything at all. Lucinda strolled into his office, without knocking, he noted. She was sipping on a cup of coffee, looked right at him as she walked across the room and perched herself on the side of his desk. "Brady, you and I might want to evacuate," he heard Jeremy snicker, took his eyes off Lucinda to glare at the man again. "Leave the door open, Jeremy," Lucinda called after them. "Great, just great." He watched Jeremy leave and heard Brady laugh about 20 seconds later. He knew Jeremy had just told him what was going on. A game of some sort, it seemed, and he was once again the joke. Nick turned to look at her. He was still annoyed with her, he realized. About her comment about Samantha. She was looking right at him with slightly narrowed eyes. Watching him as he was her. "Your new mother is coming to stay. I've organized a room on the alpha floor for her." Nick's eyes widened at her comment. It was the last thing he had expected to come out of her mouth. No wonder Jeremy was amused. "You can't just go inviting other packs to the pack without asking me," he told her, annoyed even more with her. She raised an eyebrow at the annoyance in his tone. He couldn't have hidden it even if he had tried. Too much about today was ticking him off, and she was the majority of his annoyance. "I didn't invite her to come to the pack." Lucinda smiled at him. She seemed amused by his annoyance, didn't respond with her usual indifference or anger, he noted. "Then why is she coming?" he demanded. Lucinda shrugged at him. "Mothers will do what they will do. I can't stop her." "When can I expect her?" he asked with a huff. "I don't know," she shrugged again. "Today, tomorrow, when she gets here." "Didn't tell me when she'd be arriving, in her new room." "You didn't think to press the matter." Lucinda actually laughed at him. "Now why would I do that? I like your new mother. I'm happy for her to be here." Nick was almost infuriated by her attitude. She too thought it was funny that Lindy was coming to visit. He seemed to be the only one who didn't want the woman here. "Visiting guests don't stay on the alpha floor, Lucinda. You should have discussed this with me personally. I thought I was doing that right now." Nick took in a breath and held it for a 10 count before releasing it nice and slow, trying to calm himself down. He didn't want an all-hour fight with her, especially if Lindy was going to be there during the fallout of it. "Visiting packs stay on the 3rd floor, Lucinda. She's your mother." That floor is not appropriate. She hopped off his desk, put her cup down where she'd been sitting and smiled right at him. The only floor appropriate, for the alpha's mother, is the alpha's floor. He was hating that she was smiling like that at him right this minute. He liked it too much and it was dissipating his anger. I don't like it, he informed her. She stood tapping her lower lip with her pointer finger and pouted in thought. It seemed, her eyes turned to the ceiling. For a full minute he stared at her mouth. The woman was playing with him. He was ticked off about Lindy coming at an unspecified time and annoyed about her rejecting Samantha as her omega, and there she stood using their mate bond to distract him from it all, and it was working. He was thinking about kissing the woman and his anger and annoyance at her was quickly evaporating and his desire for her was creeping in. One of these days, I'm not going to be able to stop myself, you know. His voice was all husky. Lucinda turned those gorgeous honey brown eyes on him, one corner of her mouth tilted up. The woman knew exactly what she was doing to him. That was for certain. Is that so? She walked around his desk slowly, never taking her eyes off of him, slid her hand down his arm slowly. Nick stared at her, couldn't take his eyes off of her while she was touching him like that. His heart rate doubled even though he knew she was toying with him and nothing more. Her touch was exciting him. He wanted to touch her back and was about to when her hand turned his wrist over and tapped his alpha oath. This might stop you. She smiled right at him. You're playing with fire, woman, he growled at her. No, she shook her head slowly. I'm playing with you. And you think you'll win? He asked softly. Yes, Nick, I do. She winked right at him. You can't mark or mate me until I say so, playing their mating alliance card. Oh, you think I couldn't get you to beg for me? He asked, not so much as teasing her but more of a challenge, which he wanted her to take up. She chuckled softly. It was music to his ears. Probably could, I admit it, but, he was smiling now, loved hearing that. Probably could, I admit it, liked it a lot, turned his chair so he could face her directly, but, his hand reached out and slid around her hip, pulled her towards him, his eyes never left hers. Yes, let's play who can seduce who right now, he thought. She stepped right up to him, as he pulled on her hip. Between his splayed legs and look at him, her heart rate was also racing now, and he could smell her arousal. It was light but there. Slid his hand up her back slowly and into her hair, pulled her even closer. His eyes fell to her mouth. She was biting her lower lip. A little nervous, he wondered. Pulled her so close, his mouth brushed hers as he asked again, a deep desire-filled growled question, but her lips brushed against his, and she sucked in a sharp breath. He could smell her desire now, growing at a steady rate. Being this close to him was affecting her as much as it was him. She kissed him softly on the mouth for a moment. He smiled and let her, but, the door is open. She giggled softly and yanked herself from his grip, and ran out of the room still giggling. Woman, he muttered. He was more than hot and bothered right this minute, fully aroused by her, and he wasn't about to go chase her while aroused. Woman knew it too. Had likely intended on him reacting to her, that's why she had told Jeremy to leave the door open. Rip chortled in his mind, I like it when they play with us. No longer angry with Nick, it seemed. Be more fun if we were marked and mated. Nick muttered back. Which only made Rip chortle some more. Well, at least she wasn't mad at him anymore, and she had to come to bed sometime. A little payback she would have. Nick shook his head to try and clear it. He still had to talk to her about Samantha though. He wanted the two of them to get along. He was likely going to have to sit them down together and hash it out. You'll keep, he told her via the mind link. Oh, so will you, she shot right back, still amused, it seemed. Nick couldn't help but smile, shook his head again, grew up in a very mischievous pack. Her and Jeremy together were going to be the death of him, it seemed. "Come back here and finish your game. Let's see who wins," he teased her, but really did want her to come back. "Nope. Are you afraid, Lucinda? You won't be able to resist me," he was teasing her now. "In your dreams," she told him and closed out the link. Nick laughed softly and there it was, they were back to their normal. He thought she would lose. He did enjoy playing with her in the mornings, so tomorrow she might find herself in more than a bit of a pickle. It surprised him when she returned to his office half an hour later carrying a tray of food. Placed it on his desk right in front of him, though did it from the safety of the other side of his desk, he noted. Smiled at her, she was not willing to get too close to him, it seemed. "You brought me lunch, the last few days," she told him at his inquiring look, and then sat herself in a chair on the other side of his desk. "Don't trust yourself?" he asked, leaning back in his chair with a smirk on his face. "Don't trust those hands of yours," she replied with her own smile. Then cleared her voice. "Nick, I didn't mean to fight with you this morning," she told him, more than surprising him. "I've gotten you a gift. Your mother will bring it and give it to you." His smile was gone. He really was not looking forward to having Lindy's watchful gaze on him all day, every day. "Don't look so annoyed. It's a nice gift. I think you will like it. Now I have come here to discuss the lockdown mode. I'd like to see it in action, please." Nick liked that she had apologized and apparently bought him a gift. It was rare he got gifts. He'd be happy with her as the gift. But it was unlikely that she would do that. He leaned forward and picked up the sandwich she had brought him. Why? It would be like all other pack house lockdowns, he supposed. Because as the Luna. If hits the fan, Nick. I am going to need to know how to set it off, how long it takes to be completely in effect, and how to shut it off as well. I also want to know where the emergency exit is. In case it gets so bad out there, that I need to evacuate the pack's women and children secretly. That gained his undivided attention. There was no secret exit that he was aware of, and why would there be? His pack was very large and everyone trained, all the teens and little ones and their mothers would run here for safekeeping, but they would also know how to fight too. He understood her wanting access to the lockdown, it was her who would be locking the place down, that was her job as the Luna, not out there fighting. But his pack had not seen an attack like that in the 5 years of him being in charge. His pack was larger than most around his, it was a suicide mission for any of them to attack him directly. And he would retaliate with all he had, after whoever was stupid enough to come here. He would take the battle to them and very quickly so, not give them a chance to rest and recover. I can do that, show you the lockdown and give you access to it, he nodded. There is however no secret exit from this pack house. Then there needs to be, she told him without hesitation. Why is that? He asked, more than curious now. Watched as her eyes moved to the whiteboard in his office. Then she got up and walked across the room. Because of this, she touched the darkened area on the map. There was actual sadness in her voice. Nick got up and walked over to her, could see the way her fingers were tracing it. You know the story, Nick, she practically whispered, pain filled her voice with every word. Nick slid his arms around her. That is not going to happen here. Our pack is much bigger and much stronger. They were a small pack from all accounts. He hugged her from behind. 400, he heard her voice say, with a hitch in her voice. Hey, come on. He turned her to face him and saw actual tears in her eyes. I won't let that happen here, he tried to reassure her. If you're dead, you can't stop it. She was looking right up at him. He watched as those tears spilled over. She had a real concern over this. He guessed growing up right next to that pack, maybe had a bit of guilt over her old pack not going to their aid. Wiped her tears away with his thumbs gently. Lucinda, I will never let that happen. But you can't be everywhere. Kyra will not let that happen. He tried to reassure her. He knew Kyra was never going to give up if she had to get into a fight, so did Lucinda for that matter. This was likely the best way to reassure her, use her own wolf. To be burned alive, Nick. Inside, while the pack house was in lockdown. I don't want that to happen here. It won't, he assured her. You don't actually know that with all certainty. Nick couldn't argue with that one. But he also couldn't understand why she was so very upset about it. There is no emergency exit, Lucinda, he told her gently. There needs to be one. She leaned on him. Nick frowned. She'd looked at his whiteboard, before walking over here and touching the map. He frowned deeper, his mind was ticking like crazy. Lucinda, do you know what happened to that pack? He asked softly. Yes, she nodded against his chest. I don't want to talk about it. Nick heard so much pain in her voice. He let it go and just stood there and hugged her. His eyes, however, were on the map, on that pack. She'd touched it earlier. Knew that's where she'd gone that day and found Darwin there. Corey told him she went out there sometimes to clear her mind. His hand was rubbing her back gently, trying to comfort her. I want to go home. Nick, a sob suddenly burst from her. Caught him completely off guard, and when she tried to pull away from him to leave, he held on to her, held her tight to him. Shh, you are home. This is your home now. She fought him physically for a full minute, pulling and trying to get away from him, hitting him a few times, sobbing the whole time. He'd never seen anything like it before, but could feel pain pouring out of her the whole time. He just held on to her and let her, until she finally stopped. Something was definitely missing, she'd told him a lot this morning. But clearly, stuff was still missing. You can tell me, Lucinda, whatever it is, he said softly, trying to reassure her. She didn't say anything at all. Her tears had stopped and she seemed to have pulled herself together. She removed his arms from around her, not by force, gently so, and used the back of her hand to wipe her face. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. Just tell me, so I can understand it, he asked, really wanting to understand. That pain he'd heard and felt, was almost akin to the pain she'd felt when saying goodbye to the twins. She didn't look at him. I just need more time, she said softly. Nick did not doubt that. There was something else here, that something that all of Half Moon Pack members were under threat of punishment by their own alpha if they spoke of. If okay, he nodded. When you're ready. Her honey brown eyes lifted to his, still filled with sadness. He touched her face gently. When you're ready, he reassured her. He would not push the subject. Watched her nod slowly and then walk out of his office. He didn't follow. She needed to be alone, that much he understood right this minute. He would show her the lockdown and give her access to it when she felt better. Nick turned and looked at the whiteboard. She had looked at it before walking over here to the pack map. His eyes moved back to the map. There was a connection, but what? Jeremy, my office now. He shot down the mind link. Yes, boss. Bring Brady. He wanted everyone on this. Nick wouldn't push her to tell him, but he could look into it. He was already looking at Darwin. What was one more thing to add to the list? She had said she knew what happened to that pack. Her being so upset about it. He knew that she did know, and all the gory details in all likelihood. He was standing frowning at it when Jeremy and Brady walked in and over to him. I want to know everything about that destroyed pack. He told them all of it, everything you can dig up. Why? Jeremy asked. Because Lucinda is upset about it. Cried just now when talking about it. We're missing something. Nick tapped the destroyed pack with his finger. The whole room was quiet as they all stood and looked at the darkened area on the map. It was an updated map, only a year old. Everyone was thinking right now. 78. Lucinda POV making Nick think that Lindy was coming to stay, threw him completely off guard. It was clear that he didn't want her here in his pack. Made Lucinda smile. She really liked Lindy. She was a tough and no-sense woman when it came to pack matters, but then fun and devious like Corey when she wanted to be. Lucinda had been close with her since moving to their pack. Lindy and Gabby had taken it upon themselves to be there for her and try to help her through her most difficult time in life. Most likely at first because she was the same rank as Lindy. But it had blossomed into a good friendship over the years. She had hung out with Lindy and Gabby and her own women and children. Close with all of them. She did intend to apologize to Nick at some point today, but first, try and lighten the mood. He looked really ticked off right now. She knew she had annoyed him and he was likely worried over her comments about Samantha. But she wanted him off guard to surprise him completely. She made herself coffee after agreeing with Jeremy on the suite for Samantha and her mate Frank. It was on the opposite side of the alpha floor to their suite, and she had agreed with Jeremy, after looking at half a dozen suites with him, that it was one of the largest rooms and well maintained. That the one near the elevator was the most suitable for her, their new mother. It was at least 3 times the size of the house they currently lived in. A sprawling suite with nice furniture already in it. Currently neat and clean, from not being used. Samantha and Frank could change it as they saw fit once they moved in, even bring their old furniture if they wanted to. Paint and decorate as they pleased. Lucinda doubted Nick would object at all. From what Jeremy had said, this was definitely something Nick had wanted for a long time. Told Jeremy to leave the door open, in case she needed a quick exit for herself. If she played her cards just right, she would need to run from this room and likely hide from him. The thought amused her completely. She was going to play with her mate, really play with him for the first time. She was a little bit excited, to be honest. She knew he liked to play with her, every day. It was time for a little bit of payback. She had stopped trying to ignore him and their bond over the last few days, having him come and visit and have lunch with her every day. She had liked it. Liked that he smiled at her all the time and seemed to want to take time out of his busy day to spend time with her. Even liked that they went to bed at the same time. Had gotten much closer to him, her bond had flourished and she wanted to be around him, to tease him the way he had been doing to her. Now that she was all healed up, there was a bit of a worry about how much longer she could hold out on him. She knew it wasn't likely going to be much longer. Even just watching him sleep, she couldn't help but smile. What on earth was the goddess thinking creating a man so good-looking? Even when sleeping, it was hard to look at the man without her heart quickening. Kyra didn't want to wait anymore. Lucinda sat herself on the edge of his desk, all casual and calm, and sipped her coffee, while watching him. He still looked annoyed with her, got more annoyed when he heard Brady laugh, it seemed. His dark blue eyes turned on hers and they sat staring at each other for a full minute. Trying to word her responses to his questions and keep him in the dark about Samantha moving into a suite on the alpha floor was a little difficult. Hopefully, he would appreciate all her effort and the gesture later on when he found out. He did not like the idea of Lindy on the alpha floor at all. Well, she thought, tapping her lips thoughtfully, Lindy was his other mother. Where else would she put her, when she did come to visit? Directly across the hall is where, she thought to herself, thoroughly amused now. She could already picture Lindy, leaning on the door frame from the room across the hall, staring him down. Ah, such a funny thought. It was really hard not to look at Nick right now. She could feel his eyes were on her, even knew he was focused on her mouth, like he couldn't look away. It was her intention, but it was hard not to turn her eyes on him and see just how much he wanted to kiss her, kept herself focused on the ceiling. She knew he had not fought their mate bond at all, and was way more affected by it than she was, but she really wanted to see his reaction to her, playing with him. His words gained her full attention, not being able to stop herself. Her eyes turned to him now, couldn't help it, heard the desire in his tone. His voice betrayed him more than the actual words he'd spoken, had become deep and sensual. The way it always was when he wanted her, a shiver of pleasure rolled through her. Goddess, help me to play this game. Resist him for now. She actually sent a prayer to the moon goddess herself. Heard Kyra chortle in her mind, and felt all excited that she was willing to play this game with him, their mate. Her heartbeat had increased with the sound of his tone. She half smiled at him. He couldn't do anything to her, his oath would stop him. Lucinda walked slowly towards him, registered his blue eyes darkened with desire. As she strolled towards him, he'd likely see and hear the changes in her body language as well. Slid her hand down his arm, felt those electric tingles in her fingertips, knew he felt it too, all the way down his arm, never took her eyes off of his. Watched him for his every reaction to her touch. She was going to get in so much trouble at some point. Touching him had been fun over the past few days, but now she was all healed up, he could touch back. Her hand trailed all the way to his wrist, she turned it over and tapped his oath. This might stop you. It would stop him from marking her, but not seducing her. She probably should have added that, and she realized, too late now. You're playing with fire, he growled at her. She could smell his desire now, he wanted her and she knew it, and she was starting to really want him too. No, I'm playing with you. She shook her head slightly, and she wanted to. He'd tormented her nearly every day. It was her turn to torment him back now. He could use a little payback for certain. Admitted, in all honesty, to help turn him on fully. That he could seduce her and make her beg for him to touch her. It did the trick almost instantly. Gained his full attention, he turned his chair to face her, his desire for her, she could smell, was very strong now. His hand slid soft and gentle, curling around her hip and pulled her between his legs. Oh! She was in real trouble, she realized, needed that exit and quickly. Her heartbeat doubled as he stared right into her eyes, and slid his hand slowly up her back and into her hair, grabbed a fistful of her hair and brought her mouth so close to his, nearly moaned out loud, bit her lip to stop it escaping her. But, he growled, full of nothing but desire now. He was surely going to kiss her, and it was going to be her undoing. And she knew it. Sucked in a deep breath, trying desperately to regain control of herself. She wanted him now, it was too much. Kissed him softly, touched her mouth to his, unable to stop herself. Mate! Kyra growled at her. Pulled her right to her senses, looked at him. He was smiling at her, knew he was winning, knew she wanted him right this minute, relished in knowing it. But, the door is open, she giggled and then pulled herself from his grasp. It was only light, thankfully, and was not expecting her to run from him either. Ran for dear life from his office, giggling, praying he wasn't going to come after her. Heard him, with her wolf's hearing, mutter woman, and, thankfully he didn't chase after her, had been playing on that one bit of knowledge about him hating mating balls because it meant wolves openly mated out in the open, something she knew he hated. Playing the card that he wouldn't do it himself to her. Goddess only knew what would have happened if he had chased after her. Mating. Kyra piped up excitedly. You'll keep. Nick's voice practically purred down the line at her. Oh, so will you, she giggled, all amused. She had really enjoyed toying with him, nearly lost herself completely to him, but somehow that prayer to the goddess had helped, she thought, or maybe it was Kyra's thought about mating him. She didn't know which but was thankful. Didn't want their first time to be in his office chair or on his desk. Come back here and finish your game. Let's see who wins, he was teasing, but she heard the challenge in it. Nope, she told him, she would lose and she knew it. Her heart was still beating inside her chest. Are you afraid, Lucinda? You won't be able to resist me, he sounded very amused. He knew she wouldn't, had barely escaped him. She was a little afraid, more than a little bit. In your dreams, she told him, like she'd always done to his teasing, and closed the link to him. Needed more than a minute to compose herself. Headed off to the pack house dining room to have some lunch herself. Found both Jeremy and Brady sitting at the alpha table, both their eyes moved towards her and she couldn't stop the blush that spread to her cheeks under their watchful gazes. They both started to laugh, could likely smell her, not to mention Nick's scent on her. Have some fun with Nick, did we? Jeremy smirked right at her. Didn't even care who was about to hear him either. In his dreams, she said, but smiled. Couldn't help it. Did you keep your secret at least? I did, she nodded, got food and sat down. So he thinks Lindy is coming, she chuckled softly. Made me realize when Lindy does come, I need to put her in the room right across the hall from us. Jeremy and Brady both laughed now. You know there are 4 rooms, not being used in the Alpha suite itself. You could put her and Corey in one of those. Jeremy smiled right at her, his eyes full of gleaming mischievousness. Goddess, Jers. He'd kill me. Lucinda laughed back. Ah, I think not. Just be real grumpy. But I'm sure you could cure that too, wouldn't take much. A few less clothes, he grinned right at her, and then winked too. She giggled at him. Brady chuckled softly. You two are going to drive him bonkers. Both she and Jeremy nodded. Yes we are, they said at the same time. Made all of them burst out laughing. Half an hour later, fully recovered from her own toying with him, Lucinda walked into Nick's office taking him his lunch. He'd not yet left his office to come and have it. He'd taken lunch with her while she was on bed rest. Couldn't hurt to return the favor. She found him still sitting at his desk, looked up at her as she walked into his office, a smile spread across his face, turned into a knowing smirk as she leaned across the desk to put the tray down for him. Lucinda was not going to do it from his side of the desk, nope. Didn't trust him or herself for that matter. Her actions did not fool him at all, he knew why she was on the other side of his desk. Was thoroughly amused by it, she thought, by the way he was looking at her. She took the opportunity to apologize to him for her behavior this morning and told him she had also gotten him a gift. That his mother would bring it and give it to him. Lucinda had no intention of telling him what she had set in motion. She knew Jeremy and Brady would also keep her secret. Samantha could tell him herself. Well, show him, she guessed. Hopefully he would really like it. Told him it was a nice gift. That she thought he would like it. Then she brought up the lockdown for this pack house, explained why she wanted to see it and asked to be shown the secret exit. Only to be told there wasn't one. She didn't like that there wasn't one, she wanted one. So told him there needed to be one. She would insist if it came down to it, but she was hoping he would just agree to put one in. Nick didn't seem to understand the need for one. Not like she did. Probably didn't think there was a realistic need for one. But she did. It had been the only thing that had saved her and her women and children, from all being burned alive that horrid day. Her eyes had moved to the whiteboard, to Darwin's name. Pain touched her chest. How was she going to explain this to him? Why she needed it? Felt that it was necessary. She got up and walked over to the pack map. Looked at her pack that was darkened out like a black shadow on the map, like it didn't exist anymore. Reached out and touched it, felt saddened that it couldn't be recognized as an official pack anymore. She was still here. So were her 60 women and children. Because of this, she told him, and heard the pain in her own voice, couldn't hide it. You know the story, Nick. It came as a bare whisper, her heart ached so terribly at the memory. Lucinda felt his arm slide around her, hug her from behind. Comforting her. Tried to tell her it would never happen here, that this pack. Their pack was much bigger and stronger. She knew all that, the words from all accounts left his lips and she corrected him. 400, she nearly sobbed, at the memory of that slaughter that flooded her as she recalled it took 340 lives in less than a day. They had been a small peaceful pack, only 100 trained to fight properly, not enough to save them from the invading force that had come so unexpectedly. He turned her to face him and she looked up at him. Tears blurred her vision. He was trying to reassure her but the words fell from her mouth, unable to not say them. If you're dead, you can't stop it. Felt her tears spill down her face. Alpha Jude and Matthew, she knew, had defended with their very lives, but their deaths had weakened the Luna, her too, for that matter. Again he tried to reassure her and tell her he wouldn't let that happen. He even tried to use Kyra to support his words. To be burned alive, Nick, inside while that pack house was in lockdown, I don't want that to happen here. And she did not. Never wanted to have to go through that ever again. Again he was trying to comfort and reassure her, but he couldn't, nothing could. She had to have a way out for her people. Not only her with access to it, maybe Samantha or even Kevin's mate. 2 or 3 others so they could get away while Lucinda dealt with the fallout. The pain and loss that would come with Nick's death. She knew how it felt to lose a mate. Could deal with it under extreme circumstances, but she didn't want to live that way again. Didn't want to have to live without him. Couldn't. She would fight to her own death while her women and children got away. It would be better that way. Die like he would, protecting the pack. She told him there needs to be, and leaned into him, needed him right that minute, the comfort she could feel just being close to him. Her thoughts were becoming too painful to deal with. Lucinda, do you know what happened to that pack? He asked quietly. Yes, she answered honestly, nodding her head. She would never be able to forget that day. It was burned into her very soul. I don't want to talk about it, she murmured, and really didn't, just thinking about it. She could recall the sounds of the battle that had raged outside the pack house, the smell of all that blood and death around her, remember the tearing of her own heart with the death of each of her family members, of her mate. The pain of having to kill her own Luna to save her from a monster, the smell and sounds of the pack house burning above them as they hid, praying to survive. A sob erupted from her, unable to contain it anymore. The pain was too much to handle. I want to go home, Nick, she almost pleaded with him, knew he would not understand her words, but couldn't keep them inside. Too many memories. She tried to pull away from him, hit him when he refused to let her go, didn't want him to see her like this, needed to run away home, but he wouldn't let her, held on to her, didn't even try to deflect her hits, just stayed there and took it. Had no idea why she was this way, but held on to her and tried to tell her this was her home now, but it wasn't. He didn't let go and eventually she just stopped struggling against him, and tried to pull herself together. His voice was soft and gentle, filled with concern. "You can tell me, Lucinda, whatever it is." But she wasn't ready to. Had probably already said too much, she now realized. Removed his arms from around her, wiped away her tears and apologized to him for her actions. She had lost all control of herself and her emotions. "Don't be, just tell me. So I can understand," he encouraged her. Lucinda could not look up at him. Would probably just make her cry all over again. Didn't know how to explain away her sudden emotions or tears and begging him to let her go home. "I just need more time." "Okay, when you're ready," he said softly. Lucinda knew he meant it. She looked up at him still full of sadness over the memories of her past, and didn't want to think about that happening here. Losing him too. His hand cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "When you're ready," he reaffirmed to her, making sure she understood he was not going to push her to tell him. Lucinda nodded her head in acknowledgement and then walked out of his office, to go and be on her own. Would go and call Lindy to see how her women and children were doing. Made her way to their suite and sat herself in the remaining pod chair to make the call. Lindy answered on the fourth ring. "Honey, how are you?" "Sad." Lucinda answered honestly. "How are they, Lindy?" she asked quietly. "They are all safe, I promise." "Did you and Corey talk to them?" "We did. It was unanimous, they all want to go where you go." "Are they mad that I left them behind?" "No, honey. It was explained to them. They raised many questions and concerns, but Corey asked them to be patient. Give you and Nick a couple of weeks to sort things out." They agreed. "How are things going?" "Better," she admitted. "Then why are you sad, honey?" "I miss home," she said sadly. "Okay, so you and Nick are doing okay then?" "Yes, we still fight but we're okay." "Honey, that's because he doesn't know." "If you tell him, Lucinda." "I can't, I nearly did, but..." "But what?" "I don't know if I should." "It's not just me, Lindy," she said honestly. "Your pack will trust you. Tell him and everything will be okay." Lucinda leaned back into the pod chair. "He's looking into Darwin. Worried about what he saw, with you and Darwin. I imagine." "I know. When you tell him, we will organize for your pack to come to you." "You promise, all of them?" Lucinda bit her lip. The twins were part of her pack. "All that want to go." Lindy answered. "Now, honey, go and rest and try not to be sad." "Okay." Lucinda nodded and ended the call. 79. Lucinda POV. All that want to go, Lucinda thought. So Alpha Corey had told Lindy about her conversation with him about her needing to talk to them about the twins. Which meant, in Lindy's opinion, it was up to the twins and what they wanted. They were old enough to understand, she supposed. But they had a mum and a dad, Gabby and James. Lucinda didn't know if she could separate them. The whole thing was not fair, everyone was going to be upset and someone was going to get hurt. This could well ruin their friendship altogether. Gabby might hate her. She didn't want that. Lucinda sighed. Why was everything so complicated all of the time? She had to try and find the right time to tell Nick about the twins. But in doing so, how did she explain how she was their mother, how she'd gotten them without telling him everything? Lindy had told her that the women and children would trust her. So it was now back on her to tell him. She got up and walked into their bedroom, lay down on their bed and stared at nothing at all, tried to clear her mind. Today was not the day. But perhaps tomorrow or the next day, she wanted her people here, and in order to get that, she had to tell him all of it, her whole history, everything that had happened. She sighed. It was not going to be a fun conversation, she would likely end up crying all over him, just like she had done today. He had told her he wanted to understand her, that he would wait until she was ready. Was she? Then there were the twins. If they did come here, would he accept them? They were alpha-blooded, she wouldn't expect him to give them the pack. But would want him to take them as his own, she bit her lip, would he? They were a real handful, she'd seen it firsthand. Had stepped in a few times to put her big sister's foot down, now only realizing it was more like their mother admonishing them. They did always listen to her. Now she understood why. Rolled over onto her back and stared up at the ceiling. Nick had told her he had tried to get them to come with her. So he was likely open to them being here. Had also told her he would support whatever decision she made. He'd been listening to her talk to Alpha Corey, probably understood she wanted them here with her. It was a nightmare. If she left them with Gabby and James, she would always miss them and, terribly so, her heart ached so much thinking about them. If she tried and succeeded in claiming them, it would hurt Gabby and James. She didn't want that. If the twins were told and allowed to make a choice of their own, it would hurt the one that they chose not to be with. The whole thing was a complete mess. Perhaps she should just leave it all alone. Gabby had said that they were doing just fine and she had spoken to them every day for the last 3 days. They seemed fine other than missing her like she did them. Couldn't make a decision, not like this. Needed to talk to someone, but who could understand her turmoil over this situation? Who in this pack could she trust with her secrets? Rolled over and buried her face into the pillow and then just screamed into it, trying to let out all her frustration. Then just lay there for the longest time staring at nothing at all. Her eyes flickered at the sound of the suite's door chime, must have drifted off to sleep at some point, closed her eyes still sleepy. Felt an arm slide around her neck. Who else would it be? He growled softly. What you doing? She mumbled. Though you could use a cuddle. You just want to touch me. He chuckled softly. Maybe. What time is it? Did I fall asleep? Must have, it's almost 4. She felt his whole body press up against hers, his mouth was touching her ear softly as he spoke. Is your mother here yet? She asked teasingly, trying to ignore what his closeness was doing to her. He growled at her. I don't want to talk about her. He was nibbling on her ear now. I do, she teased him again, trying to annoy him into stopping his seduction of her. No, he murmured softly, I want to steal a kiss from you. Lucinda couldn't help but smile, it did sound nice. She turned over to face him. One kiss, and she slid her hand up his arm gently, touched his face. Allowed her eyes to follow her hand. Traced one finger along his lower lip, her eyes following her finger now. Just one, she whispered and leaned over and kissed him. Pressed her lips to his softly, felt his hand slide up her back slowly and press between her shoulder blades, pressing her chest against his. She sighed softly and slipped her hand up into his hair. He bit her lip roughly, causing her to gasp in surprise, and then his tongue was tangling with hers, slowly, gently. Heard him growl at her as her whole body moved against his, and then she felt herself being pulled on top of him as he rolled onto his back. Her body was lying completely on top of his. Lucinda moaned into his mouth, when she felt his hands slide down her body, so slowly it sent electric tingles all over her body, increasing her desire for him in a single touch, felt his hands grip her firmly and pull her hard against him. She didn't stop him. Kissed him deeper, moved her hips against his. Could feel his desire for her growing, pressing hard against her, shifted herself to feel him more, straddling him, grinding herself right against him, feeling how big he was. Goddess, he was huge. He pulled away all of a sudden, shocking her completely. Her eyes opened and she looked down at him to see what was wrong. His eyes were glazed over. Pouted a little bit, pushed herself up and off him, earned a growl of disapproval. She chuckled softly and climbed off of him. Saved by whoever was talking to him. One kiss, she thought, even she wanted more now. The minute the mind link was over, his eyes were on her, dark and full of desire. She backed up on the bed, he just smiled at her and crawled after her. Come back here, he growled at her. Lucinda shook her head. Nope, you got your kiss. I want another. His hand shot out and grabbed her ankle, pulled her back to him, dropped his body on top of hers. One more, he growled. Lucinda was laughing softly at his antics. He was fully aroused and more than happy to show her too, rocking his hard CK against her. Who linked you? I'm sure you're needed elsewhere, Alpha. He groaned. I am. At the front gate he buried his face into her neck and breathed in deeply. I'll kill Jeremy, if it's not important. His hand tugged at her knee, pulling it from under him, giving him access to grind his hard CK right up against her aching core. She knew why he was annoyed and frustrated. He wanted to take it further, and goddess, so did she. She rocked herself against him, couldn't help it. Go Alpha, she whispered while she still had some self-control left. I'd rather be here ripping your clothes off, he muttered, and she knew he would. Lucinda snorted. Oh, and you think I'm going to let you, hey? Yes, he bit her neck playfully, then sighed and looked down at her, his voice deep and husky. I do. She bit her lip. He wasn't wrong. Go, she smiled at him. Who knows if I would? She teased him, pushed at him to get up and go. Nick sighed. I know you're into me. He leaned down and kissed her chastely and then got up, walked to the bedroom door, stopped and looked at her. If you're in that bed when I get back. You're mine, he growled the last two words and then was gone. Lucinda bit her lip, heard the door chime to show he'd left the suite, and groaned out loud, she would be his. She set herself up. He was too hard to resist anymore, and, he was freaking huge, he was going to split her in half. He'd been more than happy grinding his hard CK against her, showing her just how big he was, and she knew his jeans weren't doing him justice. She'd seen alphas naked before, freaking monsters between their legs. She squirmed around in the bed at the thought of him being naked with her, buried her face in the pillow and groaned. He was the biggest darn alpha she had ever seen. She had to calm down, was still aching for him. She didn't doubt he would come in here and pull her clothes off if she was still in this bed when he got back. She'd probably help him. Terrified and excited at the same time. Sat up a few minutes later. Jer's just a heads up, he's going to kill you if it's not important, she told Jeremy through the mind link. I heard his tone. Did I interrupt something? Saved by the beta, she chuckled. He laughed right back down the mind link. There is a ranked member needed at the gate and I'm helping Samantha and Frank move as we speak. Ah. Thank you for helping me out on this one. No worries, he closed out the link. Cheeky man, had gotten Nick away from the pack house altogether to move Samantha and Frank into it, and without him knowing it. A good beta he was, and a cheeky friend, she smiled. Better get out of this bed, or I'll be a goner the minute he comes back, and she knew he was going to come right back to their suite looking for her. She could feel Kyra's excitement at the prospect of mating her mate. Mating, yes, marking no. She was going to have to talk to him first, tell him about the twins and her dilemma. About the White Lotus pack and who she really was. Her remaining pack members, and that she wanted them all here, all before she let him mark her. They were going to have to build so many more homes for them. but they could all stay on the first floor of the pack house till accommodation was ready for them. There were plenty of empty rooms in this giant of a pack house that mostly just sat empty, from what she could tell. Lucinda got up and out of bed, made herself coffee. Tomorrow or the day after, better make a decision and inform Alpha Corey. She smiled to herself, stepped out into the hall with her coffee and waited for Samantha and Frank to arrive. Had yet to meet him. They all arrived together, Jeremy, Samantha, and Frank. A quick introduction was made and they were shown to their new home, here on the Alpha floor. Frank's eyes widened, probably never been up here before. He had dark brown hair, dreadlocks pulled back into a ponytail, hazel green eyes, and from what she could see of the man, tattoos on both arms and up his neck, she imagined he was likely covered in them. He was about 6 tall and well built for an Omega, must train a lot. His green eyes moved to hers. Luna. Father Frank, she returned with a smile. Where is Nick? Samantha asked. Jeremy told him he was needed at the front gate. Didn't necessarily need to be the Alpha. Jeremy chuckled. Might be cranky when he gets back. Lucinda smiled at him. Ah, I'll just hide behind you, he grinned at her. Lucinda laughed. She didn't think that was going to work. Good luck with that, Jers. He laughed outright. Just send him over to meet his new mother and father. He'll be all smiles again. She watched as his eyes glazed over, and when they cleared he was grinning. It was just a mating ball invitation. He's so angry. I'd better actually make myself scarce, and he was gone like the wind. Ah, so Lindy had gotten her word out. Let the fun begin. Poor Nick. You two are going to drive Nick insane, Samantha chuckled. Lucinda smiled at her. Yes, we are. Kyra is no better, claims to be just a puppy, so playing with her mate is fun. Frank burst out laughing. Oh, I like you. Nick could definitely use some fun after the life he had to live. Thanks, now stay in here till I send him over. He thinks Lindy is coming, so very annoyed about it. She's his other new mother. Oh, we heard about her. Frank grinned. From Nick himself. Lucinda grinned, and left them to unpack. Returned to their suite to wait on him. Leaned on the open suite door. Safer to have an exit. She knew what he wanted and was pretty certain he was going to come right back to get it. Maybe she should put more clothes on, just to annoy him. Heard him yell Jeremy's name from the 4th floor and giggled to herself. Run, she mind-linked Jeremy. I'm not even in the pack house, he laughed right back. Lucinda watched Nick stalk up the stairs a minute later, from her position in the doorway. Not important, she couldn't help but tease and laugh. He was still carrying the envelope. She lifted the phone in her hand and snapped a quick pic for Lindy as promised. He frowned at her action but said nothing about it. He could have signed for it. Nick muttered as he stalked down the hall. His eyes were on her. Lucinda stepped out into the hallway still amused, plucked the envelope from him. Mine to deal with, I believe. He was standing right in front of her. Your mother is here. She cut him off completely and nearly laughed as his eyes practically popped out of his head and a wave of anger rolled off of him. I'll kill him, he snarled. Lucinda laughed now, looked up at him now, Nicky, he was just following his Luna's orders. Play nice with the beta, or I'll tell Granny. She had to dodge the hand that shot out to grab her and run clear across the hallway. You, he stalked her, are going to be put over my knee, if you are not careful. Might like it, she burst out laughing and then took off running down the hallway heading for Samantha and Frank's room. Stopped and turned to look at him, put her hand out to knock on the door. It halted him in his tracks, stopped him dead from chasing her. Thinking Lindy was in there, she knew. His eyes moved to the door, then back to her. "Your mother is inside, you should say hello, don't you think?" Nick looked very unhappy. Right this minute, she watched him take a deep breath in to calm himself down. "Fine." Lucinda stepped away and walked over to him. "I'll let you do the knocking then." She stretched up on tippy toes and kissed him on the cheek. He actually leaned down for her to land it and let her step around him even. Lucinda smiled as she watched him walk over and stare at the door for almost a good 30 seconds, before knocking on it. It took another 30 seconds for Samantha to open the door. Lucinda wondered if she had made him wait on purpose. The shocked expression on his face at seeing Samantha standing before him was priceless. Lucinda smiled as she got to watch him try and figure out what was going on. "Son," she heard Samantha say. Lucinda had already spent time with her and Frank, not much but enough to know that they no longer felt like omegas at all. She knew he was registering it, saw his head tilt slightly as he looked down at her. "Son," she heard Frank's voice now. Saw Nick look from one to the other, then smile slowly. "Hi," he replied, seemed at a loss for words. His eyes moved from them to her, she bowed her head slightly. "My gift to you." "How?" he asked, a little bewildered. "I'm in charge of omegas, you told me so." She shrugged. "I just ranked them up according to how you see them. Ordered it more like it." Samantha interjected. That I did." She nodded. "Go and spend time with your mother and father, Nick." She smiled at him and turned to walk away. "I don't think so," she heard him say, and was on her a moment later, yanked her around to him, his mouth crashed down onto hers, hungry and demanding, picked her clean up off the floor, hugging her into his chest, growling at her the whole time. "Thank you," he whispered when finished kissing out of her. He hugged her tightly and then put her back down on the ground. "I'm a bit of a pain." "My apology gift," she told him as she tried to catch her breath. He'd never kissed her like that before. Her toes had literally curled and her heart was hammering inside her chest. If they had been alone he probably would have been able to have her, right there and then. By the way his eyes were darkened as he looked down at her, she knew he was picking up on her arousal. "Go," she pushed him gently away from her. "Call Mary and tell her." "I won't go far." She smiled at him. "I promise," she added, when he just stood there, seemed to be debating, seduction or calling his sister. He sighed in the end. "You'd better not." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Thank you, Lucinda." She smiled up at him. He liked his gift. She pushed him away towards his new mother and father, wanted to give him time with them. He and her could wait, they had waited this long, what was another few hours or a day even, nothing in the grand scheme of things. 80. Nick POV Jeremy and Brady left his office to go and find anything they could on that destroyed and abandoned pack. Nick's gut was twisting in knots. He'd seen the way she'd looked at the whiteboard, touched the pack on the map, gotten distressed. But it was the way she felt a desperate need to have an emergency exit that bothered him. He'd asked her if she actually knew what happened to that pack and she'd said yes and didn't want to talk about it. Nobody knew the details, just the story. All were killed and everything burned. Those women and children burned alive inside their own pack house. Lucinda didn't have any photos of her family. All burned in a house fire. Darwin had killed her parents, brother, and her mate. They died defending the pack. She'd hidden with the twins, survived his attack. Nick's eyes moved to the whiteboard. She'd been just 18, 8 years ago. Darwin had gone south with well over 100 of his pack's warriors. 8 years ago, he gasped, as the dots finally connected. His mate was a survivor of a pack slaughter. That had to be it. She hated Darwin with a passion like no other. She went to that empty, abandoned, burnt-out, pack territory to clear her mind. I want to go home, Nick, she'd sobbed, so much pain he'd heard. Corey had also told him just expect her to want to go home sometimes, not, come home, go home. Corey's whole pack were under threat of punishment if they talked about her history. Fear Darwin would come for that lone survivor. He'd destroyed everything, killed everyone, or thought he had. Nick's eyes moved to the map. All that rogue territory between the abandoned pack and Half Moon pack. Had she crossed it by herself, wolf-less, with twins? Or had Alpha Corey gone to see if there were any survivors left and found her, taken her in? Sweet goddess, it was no wonder she and Kyra had been on a mission to kill him. She'd been wolf-less that day. He'd not paid her any attention, likely wouldn't have recognized her at all, not after 8 years. But she had never forgotten him. The man who took everything from her, literally everything. It took just on an hour before Jeremy and Brady to return to his office. He knew right away that they knew something. Both had concerned looks on their faces. Tell me, he stated flatly. He was pretty darn sure he'd already put the puzzle together, was just waiting for confirmation. You might want to sit down, Nick, Jeremy told him. Probably. Nick nodded and did indeed sit down. Both Jeremy and Brady sat opposite him, neither seemed happy with the information they had to impart. The White Lotus pack, Jeremy told him. Nick nodded, that explained the symbol on her wrist instantly. It was a lotus flower. And Nick, Matthew White, Jeremy hesitated. Just tell me. Nick sighed, better to hear it. Alpha Jude and Luna Felicia's only son. Heir to the pack. Nick's eyes widened now, he had not put that together. What? He couldn't believe it. Mated to the future Alpha Nick. She's already a Luna, was the future Luna to the White Lotus pack. Sweet goddess, he ran his hand over his face. How'd she survive? I don't know, Nick, but... Where do you suppose the future Luna would have been during an attack? Nick closed his eyes. Inside the pack house, locked away for safekeeping. It was burned down, Nick. I've been there, there is nothing left. Kyra pawed around at the ground, lay down in a few places. It's her home. Nick nodded. Told me today, she just wanted to go home, was very upset. Alpha Darwin? Brady asked. The Alpha who killed everyone and burned the pack to the ground, burned those women and children alive, he sighed heavily. The timeline fits. 8 years ago, she said Darwin killed her family and her mate. We know that was when she was 18, which was 8 years ago. Not everyone, Nick. Jeremy said softly. Her pack members, when the Alpha and Luna were killed, he trailed off. Goddess, Brady whispered. She was the Luna, watched or heard them all die, Nick, he muttered. Her and the twins. No wonder leaving them nearly killed her, that she misses them so much. All that is left, Jeremy nodded. So. What now? Brady asked. Nothing. Nick shook his head. Don't say anything, I need her to tell me on her own. Trust me, to tell me about it. Darwin is still a problem. Nick, Jeremy stated flatly. Yes, he is. Nick nodded, though there was nothing he could do about it. The man had been missing for 8 years. Only just showed up now. Why now? He wondered out loud. Why did Darwin show up now? We don't even know why he crossed into another country, crossed 2 states to slaughter that pack. Why did he never return to his pack, or where he has been? These are all still unknown to us. Jeremy sighed and shook his head. Nick sat staring at his Alpha oath. His pack's symbol. Hers was the White Lotus pack symbol for sure. What does the pack's symbol look like? he suddenly asked, wanting actual confirmation of his thoughts. Like the one on her wrist, Nick, Jeremy replied and handed over the file to him. You might want to keep that out of sight, if you don't want her to know, you already know. Nick would put it in his safe, once he'd looked at it and read all there was about the White Lotus pack. Her pack, literally her pack, was the Luna of another pack. Destroyed as it might be, it was still hers. You don't seem all that surprised, bar her being mated to an alpha before you. Connected the dots, through what she wanted from me, how she reacted and things she said today. He nodded. Wanted of you. An emergency exit from the pack house, to be used when it's in lockdown mode. A secret escape tunnel? That's odd. Not now that I know her history, Nick sighed. He would have to really consider it. If it was going to make her feel safe, and he did want that. Feeling safe would also help her to trust him. They were all quiet. The White Lotus pack was small, about 400 members as she'd said. Quiet and never seemed to bother anyone. Had a human world advertising business, had done quite well for itself. Though, from all accounts, he was reading only operated 4 days a week. No other human businesses were registered to their pack, or they had secret unregistered businesses, or the information he was looking at was out of date. It was entirely possible. It looked like everyone was schooled inside the pack itself, with minimal human world contact. No major attacks on the pack were recorded in this file. Alpha Jude and Luna Felicia had been running the pack for 2 decades. There was nothing he could see that was out of the ordinary. Nothing to warrant such a violent end to their pack from another country's pack. It didn't add up still. It was odd, he must still be missing something, still more pieces to the puzzle that surrounded his mate. He knew she was upstairs and could feel it when he checked the line that was hers in his mind. He had to give her space, she was dealing with a lot, had been for the past 8 years. Samantha had asked him if he'd really looked at her yet. She, being an Omega who'd severed his mother, had clearly recognized her, for what she was. A Luna. Nick had presumed her feeling like a Luna to him was because she was his mate, the future Luna to this pack. He'd never gotten close to her before Alpha Corey's office to realize it. They had fought alongside Kyra and he'd thought she had been an amazingly strong warrior. Now when he looked back on that day, the way the other border patrols had all stepped aside and let her pass. They had displayed full respect to her. Was it because of Kyra's fighting abilities, or was it because she was ranked above them? It could have been both for all he knew. That whole pack knew who she was, what she was. His Luna was already a Luna. Special. Rip piped up. Yes. Nick agreed with his wolf. Very. He was concerned about her, but what could he do for her at this point? We go cuddle, mate. Nick smiled, put the file in the safe and went upstairs to check on her, found her asleep on top of their bed, probably emotionally exhausted. He just stood and looked at her for a long time from the bedroom doorway. His Luna, tiny and precious to him. He would keep her identity a secret, just like Alpha Corey had done. Protect her. If Darwin knew that the Luna of the White Lotus pack was still alive, he was likely going to come for her. Seeing as he had left no one alive, not even the defenseless women and children, wanted them all dead. For whatever reason, Nick had yet to find out. He sighed as he looked at her, she really did look tiny in his giant oversized bed. Nick lay down on the bed right behind her, slid his arm around her, to cuddle her. Didn't intend to wake her, just wanted to be close to her. Nick. Who else would it be? He asked, somewhat amused by her sleepy question. He'd kill anyone who crawled into bed with her. Rip their head right off and toss it off the balcony along with their headless corpse. What you doing? She asked, still half asleep. She was so cute. Thought you could use a cuddle, he answered honestly. She'd come upstairs after her emotional outpouring and now he'd found her asleep during the day. It wasn't like her to sleep in the middle of the day. You just want to touch me. Nick couldn't help but chuckle. It had not been his intention, but now that she was awake and being so cute. Maybe he admitted, he certainly wouldn't say now if she wanted him to. What time is it? Did I fall asleep? Must have, it's almost 4. He leaned in and spoke directly into her ear, allowing his lips to brush her delicate skin softly. Is your mother here yet? She teased him, but didn't try to pull away from him, seemed very comfortable with him being this close to her. I don't want to talk about her. Nick growled a little annoyed, and he didn't want Lindy here, she might cause more trouble between him and Lucinda. Bit her ear softly, lots of tiny bites to try and distract her from the topic, maybe find something more fun to do. I do. Her tone was quite playful, he thought, absently. His thoughts were already elsewhere. No, he whispered softly in her ear. He did not. Right at this very minute, he wanted something else from her. I want to steal a kiss from you, he told her and meant it too. Nick thought she was going to move away from him, but she instead rolled over to face him, her eyes were still closed. One kiss, it was a question, just one he thought she was asking. Then felt his hand slide up his arm, slowly. Smile at her, he might actually get what he wanted, he thought. He saw her eyes open and follow her own hand's movement. That hand slid all the way up his arm, across his shoulder, up his neck. The minute her fingers trailed over his mark spot, his CK twitched to life, it shot hot electric bolts through his body, and desire spread through him quicker than he'd ever felt before. She could turn him on so quickly, it surprised even him. Her fingers slid along his jaw, then just one finger along his bottom lip. His heartbeat had doubled and he was enjoying her touching him willingly. Just one, she said softly to him and leaned up and kissed him gently. Thank the goddess. His eyes closed and he allowed himself to just enjoy the first time she really kissed him, wanted to be even closer to her. Slid his hand that had been resting on the small of her back up to press her against him, heard her sigh softly, pleasure-filled it was, felt it right against his mouth. Wonderful. He slid his hand up into her hair, grabbing a fistful of it, so darn soft and silky under his hand, bit her lower lip wanting to taste her, needing more from her. She gasped, her mouth opened and his tongue slipped right into her mouth to tangle with hers, kept it soft and gentle, not wanting to push her too much, but loving the taste of her at the same time. He lay there and kissed her long and softly for a long time, felt her body start to move against his, growled at her, he could smell her arousal and he wanted more, pulled her on top of him, without breaking their kiss. Her whole body was stretched out on top of his body was hot and rock hard, he was so hard for her, wanted her to know what she was doing to him. Slid his hands down her back, she moaned right into his mouth. Goddess, he could smell her arousal so strong, pulled her body hard against his, showing her just what she had done to him, how hard he was for her. Gripped her even firmer when she deepened the kiss, felt her move, straddling him and started grinding herself against his rock. Amazing it was. She was moving all of her own accord, wanting him, and all he'd asked for was a single kiss. He was getting everything he wanted and loving it. The feel of her on top of him, knowing she wanted him. Nick, you are needed, at the front gate. Jeremy's voice came through the mind link. Nick nearly roared at him. The man had terrible timing. Nick broke their kiss, he knew Jeremy would pick up on his mood through the link he'd established. Not now. Important, you have a visitor. There was amusement in Jeremy's tone. Nick felt Lucinda move, sat up on him for a moment, he growled at the loss of her body on his, and then she was climbing off of him altogether. Not what he wanted at all. Who, Jeremy? I'm busy. Certainly felt like I was interrupting. He sounded very amused now. Then Beta, deal with it. I can't, you have to. You were requested to go to the front gate. Sorry, Nick. He didn't sound at all sorry. Better be important. Nick cut the link. His eyes found hers and he got up. The visitor could wait, watched her back away from him, smiled. Yes, run away, I do like a good chase, he thought as he crawled across the bed towards her on his hands and knees. He wasn't finished having his way with her yet, growled all his desire for her showing. Come back here. Watched her shake her head as she continued to back up the bed. Nope, you got your kiss. Oh yes, he had, and he wanted more, lots more. I want another. He snagged her ankle and pulled her giggling back across the bed. She didn't even resist, not even when he pinned her down on the bed. He was struggling against the urge to hump her silly. She laughed softly at him. Knew in all likelihood that he had to get up and go. Was teasing him, calling him alpha was not helping the situation at all, just made him want to grind against her till she begged for more. Buried his face in her neck and breathed her scent in, made it worse, started grinding against her, shifted his body and pulled at her knee to gain better access to what he wanted. To grind his hard CK right against her hot core. Goddess, she smelled so darn good and her desire for him was strong. She wanted it as much as he did. Felt her grind herself against him in return. Bit her on the neck while she teased him about not letting him rip her clothes off. Nick believed if Jeremy hadn't interrupted, he could have gotten her clothes off. Lucinda was into it, moving her body against his, all of her own accord. He could still smell her arousal even now as she was pushing at him and telling him to go. He looked down at her after propping himself up on his elbows. Kissed her chastely and forced himself to get out of their bed, off of her and go and do his alpha duties. Did not want to. Looked at her lying in their bed watching him. She was flushed still from their make-out session and that one leg was still splayed out where he'd moved it to gain what he wanted from her. Every part of him was screaming to get back in bed. If you're still in that bed when I get back, he was praying she would. You're mine, he growled at her, all his intent showing. And then he left the room before he couldn't. Leaned on the suite door after it closed and locked him out, shut his eyes and tried to calm himself down. He couldn't very well go walking through the pack house with a raging erection now, could he? Once he calmed down, he headed for the front gate, took his car, would be quicker. There was a young she-wolf standing there, leaning against what looked like a pack car. Her eyes fell on him and he watched her smile as her eyes slid over him, taking him all in it seemed. Annoyed him instantly, he had a mate. How can I help you? He asked curtly. Could you sign for this please? She held out an envelope. What is it? He asked without taking it. She stepped right up to him, a mating ball invitation. Nick frowned, he was going to kill his beta, he could have signed for the thing. His mating alliance didn't allow him to say no anymore. Signed for it and nodded to her, turned and walked away. I hope you come yourself, she openly flirted with him, dropping her voice to a husky tone. I have a mate, he snapped at her flirtatious tone. Pity, he heard her sigh, with his alpha hearing, and headed back to the pack house. A freaking mating ball invite, he shot down the mind link to Jeremy. Sorry boss, how was I supposed to know? I'm going to beat you senseless. Nick snarled at him. Stalked up the pack house stairs to the 4th floor and yelled Jeremy's name. Got no response, pushed into his suite, not there. He'd keep, he was going to be pounded into the ground. He'd heard Lucinda giggle from the floor above, no longer inside their suite. Made him even more annoyed. That not only had their real first intimate moment been interrupted and ruined, she'd left the suite altogether. Jeremy really was asking for a beating this time. Nick stalked his way up to the 5th floor, to see her leaning against the door to their suite. Not important, she laughed. Snapped a picture of him. For some reason, he let it go, like that she wanted a picture of him on her phone, didn't care that he probably looked utterly furious. Should make it her home screen so anyone who sees it knows he's her mate and not to be messed with. The laughing probably meant that she already knew what it was. In cahoots with Jeremy, it seemed. His eyes were on her. He could just pull her back into their suite to their bed. Mating ball invitation. She stepped out of the doorway now and took it from him. Mine to deal with, I believe. He was standing right in front of her, wanted to pick her up, toss her over his shoulder and throw her back down onto their bed. Let's. Your mother is here. She cut him off intentionally, still smiling. How? His eyes widened. That was not possible. The guards would have told him, or at least they would have told Jeremy. A wave of anger rolled through him, that he had sent him down there to the front gate to sneak Lindy into the pack, must have told the guards he'd tell Nick. That's why they hadn't mentioned it to him. I'll kill him. Nick snarled. That man had gone one step too far this time. Lucinda was laughing now. He didn't find it funny at all. The two of them had planned this little hide-and-sneak game. It was obvious, the timing was too convenient. Now, Nicky, she teased him openly. Oh, she wanted to play, she'd get more than she bargained for. He was just following his Luna's order. Play nice with the beta. Oh, he was going to beat the boy till he was black and blue, or I'll tell Granny. Nick's hand shot out to grab her. She knew it was coming, had to be to move that fast to get out of the way, anticipating his reaction to her words. Ducked under and then ran away to the other side of the alpha hallway. You. Nick looked right at her. Taking a slow, deliberate step towards her, are going to be put over my knee, he told her, taking a page out of Alpha Corey's book. If you're not careful. He took another step towards her. To his delight, she responded with might, like it fully tormenting him now. His anger was gone in an instant, she was laughing now. Nick smiled right at her. Oh, it was on, he thought as she ran off down the hallway away from him. Chase. Rip said excitedly. Yes. Nick agreed, and ran after her. Only to stop when he saw her stop and look at him, ready to knock on a door. Froze in place, Lindy would be in there. He looked at the door annoyed again. She was tormenting him, because she knew he couldn't do anything to her with Lindy right there. Your mother is inside. You should say hello, don't you think? Nick and Rip were both feeling frustrated now. Their chance at mating her, which had been dwindling, was now gone, and they both knew it. He drew in a deep breath and calmed himself, pulled on his ability to be calm when he didn't want to be. Being angry in front of Lindy would get him nowhere fast. Fine. He watched her walk back over to him, smiling happily, a genuine smile up at him. Made him happy. Stretched up onto her toes, and he realized she was going to kiss him again, of her own free will. Loved it. Their bond, it seemed, was going to be all good. Nick leaned down and let her, only a little disappointed it was on his cheek, not his lips. But better than nothing. 81. Nick POV. He knocked on the door, and it did not surprise him that Lindy would make him wait for however long she wanted, before answering the door. She had enjoyed making him wait the last time he'd been in her company. And though this was his pack, she was considered his mother, which meant, unfortunately, he had to show respect. Irked him to no end. The door finally opened after what felt like forever to Nick, and Samantha stood before him. He blinked in surprise and his eyes widened in complete shock at seeing her standing before him in a suite on the Alpha floor. He and Mary had tried many times over the years to get her and Frank to move up here. She had raised him and Mary. It was something the two of them wanted to do for them, to say thank you for everything they had done. Samantha had always refused it. Nothing either of them had ever said could sway her or Frank, for that matter, into residing in the pack house, let alone on the Alpha floor. Son, she smiled right at him. Nick's heart soared. She only ever called him Nick or Nicholas, never son. He'd told her she could win just a teenager, but she'd just bowed her head and stated he was an Alpha and she his Omega. It wasn't respectful to his mother, yet here she was on the Alpha floor, in a suite, and now calling him son. Then it hit him, she didn't feel like an Omega anymore, something was very different about her. He really looked at her, so did Rip, pushing forward to smell her himself. They breathed in deeply and there it was, a new rank. Son. Frank's voice came to him, as he appeared behind Samantha, to smile at him too. Nick looked from one to the other, they had both been ranked up. He had not done it. Mary wasn't here to do it. He finally managed to produce from his shocked state of mind. Then it dawned on him, Lucinda, she was the only other person who could do this. She and Jeremy had been gone for hours today. His eyes moved to her. His beautiful mate had done something in a day that he'd not been able to do in 5 years. Saw her smile softly at him and then bow her head slightly. She never had to do that to him. My gift to you. Samantha corrected her, informed him she had ordered it. Nick didn't actually care how it was done, she had done it. That was all that mattered to him. If he had not loved her before, he did now. How he'd been blessed with her, he had no idea. Must treasure her, Rip told him. Nick agreed with his wolf on that one. When she told him to spend time with his mother and father and turned to walk away, oh no was all he could think. You don't get away that easy. I don't think so, he told her and shot over to her, pulled her to him and kissed out of her, picked her clean up off the ground and continued to kiss out of her. He didn't care who saw him, didn't care about anything, excepting kissing her. Showing her how much what she had done meant to him. Still holding her around the waist, when he broke the kiss, she'd allowed him to kiss her, hadn't stopped him, had kissed him back just as passionately. Thank you, he growled softly, meaning every word. She truly was amazing, had been here just over a week now, and despite their very rocky start, was bringing happiness to him and the pack, not to mention all those currently in heat at the moment either. The goddess surely had blessed him indeed. He finally put her down on her own 2 feet, hugged her tightly to him. Couldn't help himself. I'm a bit of a pain, she acknowledged. My apology gift. She sounded breathless from their kiss and her heart was beating as fast as his was right that minute, and he could smell her arousal, could see more golden flecks in her honey brown eyes. His kiss had turned her on. Made him happy. Go, she tried to push him back towards Samantha and Frank, trying to get him to walk from her, back to his family. Call Mary and tell her, she told him. Like she even knew what he wanted to do. He was itching too, but at the same time he wanted to surprise her, the way Lucinda had surprised him. Stand and watch her reaction to it. I won't go far, she told him and then smiled as though she knew he didn't believe her. I promise. Nick smiled down at her. Leaned down and kissed her forehead softly, told her she had better not go anywhere. Thanked her again. He had no idea how to repay her. Didn't even know where to start or even if there was anything that would compare to this level of a gift. He walked back to Samantha and Frank, who were in their suite's doorway, just watching him and Lucinda, he realized. A little embarrassed by his actions now. They'd never seen him with a girl before, well, not since his teen years anyway. They were both just smiling at him. Frank's arms were around Samantha's waist and she was leaning back against him, smiling up at him. "You seem happy, Nick." "I am," he admitted. "Can't wait till Mary comes home and finds out." She and Frank stepped inside the suite and Nick followed. His eyes moved to Lucinda right before he stepped inside the suite. She was headed to their suite, it appeared. She seemed comfortable here in his pack. He was happy to know that, happy at her wanting to give him this gift. From all he'd read and learned from the books Lindy had given him, Lucinda was going to make a great Luna. He spent an hour with Samantha and Frank. Samantha had been in this room before, Frank however had not. He seemed a little overwhelmed by all the space. This suite was much bigger than their house. Each of the bedrooms had their own walk-in and en-suite, the kitchen was 3 times the size of the one in their home and the living area would easily host all the guests they could want to have for a party up here. Nick guessed this was Jeremy's influence. Lucinda would not have known which rooms were better, larger or more suitable for this kind of thing. No wonder they had been gone so long, not his game, a game the pair of them had hatched together, it seemed. Nick made sure that both Samantha and Frank knew they could change anything in this room. It was now their home and they could get rid of or replace anything they wanted. That he would give them new pack cards with access to unlimited funds to do as they pleased. That set the pair of them off on a rant. Samantha about it was inappropriate and Frank about that it was a complete waste of money. If he kept handing out pack funds like that, they would go bankrupt in no time. Nick laughed. It was not going to happen. The pack had several human world businesses. All very well run and raked in a load of money. The pack was very wealthy and he wasn't frivolous with pack funds. And invested wisely, actually owned a very profitable stock brokerage company, along with 2 accounting firms and a law firm that had offices in 4 different states. And a real estate company that had 6 branches to its name. So he told them they were not getting a choice in the matter. That their new rank called for it and it was not to be argued with. Nick made sure they were settled, would have some help for them first thing in the morning to stock the pantry and fridge, which Samantha immediately argued with him about. She could do it herself. Now that got his mind ticking. Everyone knew Samantha was his most trusted and loyal Omega. All the Omegas knew who she was too. "Samantha, Mother," he corrected himself with a smile, "I'd like to put you in charge of all the Omegas and their schedules." "What? Why?" "Well, I know you're not going to just want to sit around all day and do nothing." She nodded as expected. "So a new position, for your new rank. And it'll allow you to still assist Lucinda with her Luna duties. I have a feeling you will still want to do that." "Yes, I would," she nodded. "We can discuss it tomorrow, son. You should get back to your mate. Looks like the 2 of you are finally getting along." Nick smiled. "It does, but we still have our arguments." She waved it off. "That might change once you understand her a bit better." "I do understand her. More than she thinks right now. But I want her to trust me, to tell me on her own." "Ah, so you finally looked at her properly." Samantha smiled at him. "No. I never actually understood that comment from you. Information she told me and her reactions led me to connect some dots and figure out who she is, a survivor, and that led me to investigate more." And he shrugged. "You knew though?" "Yes, from the first moment I saw her. Felt like a Luna." She did. "Cheeky woman, should have just told me." He hugged her. "Now, why would I do that? Some things you should learn for yourself, son." I guess so, he nodded. He left the suite and the two of them to settle in. Jeremy, yes boss, one day I am going to get you back, you know, he smiled. No Nick, don't worry about it. Happy to help on that one. Thank you. Anytime. Nick's eyes moved to his suite. He walked over there. Lucinda was sitting on the balcony in the remaining pod chair. He nearly laughed when he saw her. Multiple layers of clothing on. Oh, you think that will save you? He smirked at her. She smiled up at him. Maybe sounded a little bit nervous to him. Nick couldn't help but tease her. Oh my dear, it will not. He reached into the chair and pulled her out of it, and right into their bedroom. Strip woman, he said, folding his arms across his chest and looking right at her. What? Her eyes widened up at him. Strip, get your clothes off, he repeated himself, enjoying his little game. The tables had turned. Nick, she gasped at him, more than a little nervous now, he realized. I can help, if you like, he smirked at her. Tormenting her was so much fun. He reached his hands out as though he was going to start removing her clothes. On my terms, she backed away from him slowly. It will be. But I am going to seduce you. No. No, she shook her head, backing away again, a little faster this time. Nick grinned at her. Acting like prey, might just get you hunted, my dear, he added a little playful growl to his words and watched her stop dead in her tracks, now completely uncertain as to what to do. He took a deliberate step towards her and she bolted clear across the room. Nick laughed, it was what he wanted. Ran after her, was not really going to seduce, but really wanted to play with her, watched as she leaped up onto their bed and ran clear across it, heading for the bedroom door. He was hot on her heels, allowing his hands to just touch her. She squealed and pivoted away from him. He chased her out into the living room, used Rip's speed to bar her exit from the suite. Growled right at her and she turned and ran for the dining room. He went right after her, chasing her around the table, laughing at her. She was now laughing too. They were standing on opposite sides of the dining room table staring at each other. He could see she was sweating under all those extra layers she'd put on. They were killing her, so to speak. May I help you remove some of your layers, my dear? No, she laughed. Ah, where's the trust? He growled playfully. Out the window, she giggled. Let me throw all your clothes out the window, then you'll have to be naked. Lucinda was shaking her head at him. Nick, don't be silly. I'm never silly, he smiled at her and then, on an impulse, turned and left the room to do just what he'd said he would. Heard her calling his name, heard her come after him, when she realized he was actually going to do it. He strode right to the walk-in and was about to pull her clothes from the hangers, still smiling at himself, when her hand grabbed his arm. Stop, she gasped at him. Nick turned and snagged her. He could always find a way to get what he wanted. Picked her clean up off the floor and carried her to their bed. She was giggling at him. I know, he laughed. Caught my prey? Now what to do with it, he teased her. Sank down on the bed and pulled her onto his lap. She was smiling up at him. He really did love that she could look up at him like this, smile just for him. Slid his hand along her jaw and leaned down to kiss her, long and slow, deeply. Felt her lean into him, slid his arms around her. He just wanted to sit and hold her, kiss her. She pulled away first, a little breathless, looked up at him a little on the shy side and then hopped off his lap. He did not stop her, watched as she peeled off all her extra layers, smiled at her the whole time. Have dinner with me? He asked. In a movie? She looked right at him. Are you asking me on a date? Yes, and he was. A real date? She smiled at him again. I'd like that. Good, wear that purple dress. He grinned at her. She wanted to go on a date with him. She laughed. Are your hands going to stay away? Nick snorted at her. No, he told her honestly and got up. I'll shower and change first, then wait in the living area for you. He walked over and tilted her chin up. When have my hands ever kept to themselves? He kissed her softly on the mouth and then headed for the bathroom. Jeremy, yes Nick. Organize dinner in my dining room for Lucinda and I. 1 hour, 3-course meal. Yes Nick, getting along, I see. Shut it. He severed the link and showered, washed his hair and shaved when he got out. She was sitting on the bed, and watched him exit the bathroom, slid her eyes over his nearly naked body, only wearing a towel like he always did. Want to skip dinner? He teased her. Watched her blush and look away. Go get dressed, she told him. Nick chuckled and headed for the walk-in to change. He'd yet to replace his favorite suit, what to wear. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.